The two biggest stories entering Chicago Bears training camp are the injury status of rookie tight end Colson Loveland and veteran left tackle Braxton Jones. One of them got good news, the other one, bad news.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, I want to go through the latest injury updates for Colson Loveland and Braxton Jones and what it means for their availability at the start of training camp and how that might shape the rest of their 2025 seasons, respectively. And then I also want to make some time to talk about the Locked On Podcast Network's top 100 NFL players with only one Chicago Bears player on it in the top 100. Definitely some snubs we need to talk about for that list as well. But let's start with rookie tight end Colson Loveland, because I think he's the player we're most excited to see take the field for the first time. We knew when the Bears drafted him that he was recovering from AC joint surgery in his shoulder, his right shoulder, that he had in January following the college football season. Known issue through the draft, known ailment when drafting him that, hey, he's not ready to go just yet. So he does work off to the side in rookie minicamp, OTAs, and mandatory minicamp. And all along, the Bears have kind of said the plan is, the goal is, we're shooting for training camp. That was the prognosis when he first had the surgery. They told him it'd be about a 6-month recovery timeline. And if he has the surgery in January, 6 months later would put him in July, where we are now. And that should mean ready to go for training camp, right? Well, all along the way, they keep saying that's the goal, that's the hope, that's the plan. But as we know, when it comes to medical recovery, goals, hopes, and plans don't always mean everything is exactly perfectly on time and lined up. But every update we get from Colson Loveland feels like positive and in the right direction. And while we don't have a clear set 100% good to go prognosis just yet, we're getting about as close as we can get to that. And it's funny, Colson Loveland was doing some kind of like charity of fundraiser event thing at the Great Wolf Lodge Hotel Resort in Gurnee, Illinois. And, media will be there to cover, even charity events that players involved. So, of course, he gets to be asked questions afterwards. And everyone wants to know, how is the shoulder doing? How is he coming along there? And essentially he says, feels a lot better. It's doing great. He even said, it feels 100%. But then the follow-up is well, are you going to be on the field for training camp then? He said, well, we got to see once we actually get out there, but it feels better. And he even got into some specifics and mentioned the scar tissue is I don't think he said it is gone, but they're seeing, all the positive reduction in scar tissue and everything that they've been looking for from a surgery recovery standpoint. So in theory, he should be good to go for the start of training camp. But I think there's some specific aspects that they need to actually get him out there and see how it goes first before, he can truly be 100% cleared for all in full activity there, right? For his shoulder, it's not purely like a mobility issue, right? But it's sort of a strength and durability issue. It's being able to withstand, not full contact per se, but in some ways contact, right? Catching passes, running over the middle of the field, being accidentally bumped by a lineman or a defensive player, whatever it might be, right? There's going to be physical contact to some degree at these practices, even when pads aren't on. And it's about sort of the strength and durability and how well the shoulder will hold up, right? It's about not wanting to risk any type of re-injury until you feel like that surgically repaired joint is as strong as as you hope it can be and as whatever 100% is going to look like at this point. And so I would imagine as Colson Loveland and the rookies report to camp in the next few days, what we're going to find out is like Loveland's not going to be on, and this is just my guess here. I should clarify. Like my expectation is Loveland is not going to land on, say, the physically unable to perform list, right? I think he will be ready to go in that regard. But it's not as though the first day of practice is he going to be up to 100%. And I think we remember from the Eberflus era, and I think this is not just an Eberflus thing, but they talk about this ramp up period, right? When a player would recover from injury at training camp, they would need a couple of days of just kind of, I don't want to say getting back into football shape, because it's not that he's like out of shape, right? But just going from not being able to practice in full to practicing in full is a little bit of a big jump there. And so I would imagine we'll see him gradually, like he'll be a lot more involved in the first day and then gradually grow to 100% involvement over the course of 1 or 2 or 3 practices before he is, ramped up and now ready for everything they're going to throw at him. Not because purely like the shoulder needs 3 more days of healing, but just like he needs a couple of days of like getting back to full speed of actually, running full speed and bracing for that contact and catching passes and going through drills, right? There's an aspect of some of it, I guess, is conditioning, I suppose, but there's an aspect of like, he hasn't practiced all off season. You're not just going to throw him into the fire and have him do absolutely everything right away from day one. So I would imagine with Loveland, like he'll be back at practice right away, but then it'll take a couple of days to really be a full 100%, no restrictions involved in everything participant in practice. And to me, like this is best case scenario at that point. Once he misses all of OTAs, minicamp, etc., then his only shot of then his next shot of coming back is the beginning of training camp. Like whether his shoulder was 100% 2 weeks ago or it's not 100% until tomorrow, he's going to have to do some ramping up. Like that was just always going to be the reality that if you but if you're unable to go for all the practices up to this point, your first practice is never going to be 100% full go there. So I think this is as good as we could hope for Colston Loveland at this point, assuming it all goes in that trajectory and there isn't any kind of setback or they don't discover some things haven't recovered or whatever it might be, right? That's the direction we're going, which is great for him to miss the minimal amount of time that we thought he would. The goal was have him back for training camp. We didn't think he'd be ready for anything up until training camp. And so this is like, if he's ready to go right away, the minimum amount of time he needed to miss so that he can catch up, get up to speed, and be the best version of Colston Loveland he can be by week 1 and be a big part of this offense, as opposed to starting training camp on the PUP list, missing whatever it is, a week or 2 of practice, and then getting a slow ramp up from there, and all of a sudden you're playing catch up all season long. Like, yeah, he's got a little bit of catch up to do right now, but I think training camp in the preseason is enough time for him to be locked and loaded and a big part of Ben Johnson's offense this season. Now, unfortunately, I don't think the same is true yet for Braxton Jones, but as a veteran offensive lineman, he'll have less catching up to do, but sounds like he's not going to be ready as quickly as Colson Loveland. So we'll check in on what the veteran's recovery is looking like from his offseason surgery and what it means for the Bears' left tackle battle next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, fun little all-star weekend, well, it wasn't really a weekend, but golf on the green or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting because you're already following the action. So why not add a little more to it with FanDuel where you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. FanDuel is super easy to use, fast to pay out, and even makes regular season games feel like must-watch events. You can look ahead to this Bears season and bet on Bears-Vikings in Week 1, Ben Johnson's Coach of the Year odds, Caleb Williams' passing yards, props, and so much more. And now is a great time to get started because if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. So Colston Loveland's prognosis is generally improving. I would consider that maybe not a lot new has happened, but it is still good news on his front when, there's always just the possibility of things maybe going awry or going backwards or not recovering at the kind of timeline that you might have hoped they would. And that seems to be some of the case, and we don't know the exact extent, but some of the case with Braxton Jones, who also had off-season surgery, also was expected to be ready for the start of training camp, or the plan was he would be ready for the start of training camp. And now with training camp on the horizon, as best we know, he's not going to be likely ready for the start of training camp. Now, how long it takes him to be ready is still very much up in the air, but the update we got is not necessarily, I don't want to say it's not encouraging, makes it sound like it's horrible, and I think it's middle of the pack. It's not good, but it could be a lot worse, but it's still not ideal for Braxton Jones or the Chicago Bears. So one of the best, I think I can say definitively, the current best or most plugged in Chicago Bears reporter out there right now is Brad Biggs of the Chicago Tribune, and he was interviewed over on 670 The Score radio in Chicago and was asked about Braxton Jones' injury status and provided us some good intel there. The quote from Brad Biggs was, quote, "If Braxton Jones starts training camp on the physically unable to perform list, which is a possibility, I don't think he would be on there real long." Brad Biggs goes on to say, "I was told he's not ready at the start of camp, but they didn't feel like it was going to be too long into camp until he was ready." And so the idea there being, if he ends up on the PUP list, that doesn't mean it's going to be another 3 weeks and he won't be ready until the second preseason game necessarily. There's a feeling like, hey, maybe this hasn't recovered exactly as fast as they wanted, and he might not then be ready for the very start of training camp, but maybe he just needs a few more days, another week or so, just to get that strength back to truly 100%. And it's the kind of thing where the difference with Colson Loveland, right, is Jones might not need that much more time, but when we're talking about an ankle injury, there's not much he can go out and do on a limited basis in a boot, or with limitations on your ability to run and change direction with your ankles. I don't want to say it's an all or nothing kind of injury, but it's more all or nothing than a right shoulder where, Loveland was still catching some passes and walking through some things on his own on the side. You can run routes even if your shoulder's in a sling, right? I mean, not that it was, but you get the idea. There's more you can do as a tight end with a shoulder injury than there is as an offensive lineman with an ankle injury. And so I think with him, it's more about hitting a certain threshold of recovery and strength to then be able to go back out there. And then like we talked about with Loveland, I think Braxton Jones will have a little bit of a ramp-up period of his own where the first day he comes off the PUP list, he's not necessarily jumping back in the starting lineup at left tackle and taking all the first-team reps. And the longer he's out, perhaps the fewer of those first-team reps will still be available there for him to take, because this left tackle battle is going to be ongoing with or without him out there. And the longer he's absent, the farther behind he could start to fall. Now, the big advantage for Braxton Jones is that he is the veteran player in the mix, that he is entering the fourth year of his NFL career. He knows how to play left tackle at a starting caliber NFL level. He might not have the intricacies of Ben Johnson's offense or the intricacies of Dan Rochar's, offensive line protection calls and, terminology and such, but neither does Ozzy Trapillo or Karan Amagaji. The only advantage that those guys have is that they've been on the field doing it with their teammates, whereas Braxton Jones has not been able to actually do it on the field with his teammates. But Braxton Jones, right, he's still able to get the playbook, still able to learn the terminology and the calls. He might not have been able to physically do it, but he's not going to be mentally behind there. Whereas he's going to be, I don't want to say physically ahead because the ankle's been out, but as an NFL offensive tackle, if Braxton Jones and Ozzy Trapillo were 100% healthy today, Braxton Jones is clearly right now today the better left tackle. A 3-year starting left tackle in the NFL is almost always going to be instantly better than a rookie second-round pick in his first training camp. Now, maybe by week 1 or by week 10 or whatever, Ozzy Trapilo can and will eventually, or was drafted to be, an upgrade over Braxton Jones. But when he's 3 months into his NFL career, Ozzy Trapilo is, like, a player who's 3 years in should be a lot more advanced than a player who's 3 months in. So as much as Ozzy Trapilo is getting a head start in this left tackle battle, and we can't rule out Karan Amagaji in this conversation either, but Braxton Jones should be able to make up ground quickly once he gets fully healthy. I think the main factor here is just that amount of time, because we know that Ben Johnson and Dan Richard and this Bears offensive staff, like, they want to get a starting 5 in place quickly. We already know what the 4 are going to be besides left tackle, with Joe Thuney, Drew Dahlman, Jonah Jackson, Darnell Wright. And they want to solidify that left tackle spot. Now, they're not going to rush to just, we got to pick somebody, so we'll just decide on him and then go, and sorry, we're not going to change our mind. Like, they still first have to make sure they're going to make the right choice and get the better player. But, like, the goal is to get your 5 best offensive linemen, and you would rather decide correctly on who your best 5 are later in the process than choose too early just for the sake of choosing one and then not end up picking the right guy and having to make a swap later on down the line if whatever option you go with doesn't end up working out super well. And so my confidence in Braxton Jones's ability to be the starting left tackle week 1 will purely depend on how long it takes before he's back out there at practice. I think if Braxton Jones misses, I don't know, there's not a perfect number here, but like 2 weeks or less of training camp, and maybe that even is a little bit high on the threshold, but certainly like anything a week or less, he'll be fine, and I think he'll be your starting left tackle. If it's 2 weeks or more of missed training camp time, that, like, 2 weeks of practices can absolutely be enough for someone like Ozzy Trapilo to give the Bears confidence in him as their starting left tackle. Like, this staff didn't draft Braxton Jones. They did draft Ozzy Trapilo, so there's maybe even some favorability in that regard. And, like, they don't have any ties to Braxton Jones. Like, there's no incentive to give Jones the job over Trapilo or Karan Amagaji, right? Their only incentive is to pick the best starting left tackle for the Chicago Bears. It's not like they're paying Braxton Jones a bunch of money, so they got to kind of get him on the field to make him worth that contract. Or it's not like they drafted Braxton Jones, they really want to make sure they see this through, so they got to get him on the field to push his development. Like, if anything, like, they have an incentive to sit Ozzy Trapilo for a year and let him develop. Like, I think in an ideal world, right, Braxton Jones starts this year, Trapilo can kind of take some time to develop and doesn't get thrown out into the fire and having to learn on the fly as a rookie, and then takes over next season, or certainly if Jones suffers another injury for the 3rd year in a row, then Trapilo could take over midseason. But it does feel to me like a bit of a 2-horse race at that spot. I know initially, like, Amagaji and Trapilo were kind of splitting reps back and forth, but I think there's a certain, I don't want to say understanding, but it feels a little bit like a foregone conclusion that, like, this is coming down to Trapilo versus Jones, and Amagaji's not necessarily a super serious contender right now to win that job. I guess never say never. Like, if Jones is out for 2 or 3 weeks and Amagaji and Trapilo keep going back and forth, I mean, Amagaji's not out of the race by any means, but it feels like he's going to be a backup this season, which is understandable for a super raw developmental 3rd round pick who's still catching up and still learning how to do this at the NFL level. Like, Trapilo comes in with a much higher floor and much more ready to play right away, whereas Amagaji's got the higher ceiling with the physical tools, but still needs a lot of refinement in order to get there and potentially become what the Bears want him to be with that 3rd round pick. So in some ways, Braxton Jones kind of controls his own destiny, although it's an injury, so he doesn't really control the injury. But, like, this to me is all tied. It's all about time. If Jones has enough time, he'll win the battle. If Jones is delayed too much, it might just be Ozzy Trapilo's by default because he's been in there, and if he's playing at a high enough level, then they'll keep him in there and not be in a rush to force Jones back out. But it's all about making sure this Bears offensive line is as solid as possible, and everything else comes secondary to that. And having a really strong left guard next to the left tackle spot in Joe Thuney will go a long way towards helping whoever is going to be there. And Joe Thuney made it into the top 100 players in the NFL, as voted by us, the hosts here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But Joe Thuney was the only Chicago Bears player to make the top 100. And that leaves some very serious snubs we need to talk about next on Locked On Bears. There's no doubt that Joe Thuney is absolutely one of the top 100 players in the NFL right now. And I think he lands in a spot on our list that we'll talk about in a second that's pretty close to right where he deserves. I'd argue a little bit higher, but I'm not going to complain too much about that when we have a much stronger complaint to be made about the lack of mainly Jalen Johnson on this NFL top 100 list, who's clearly better than a number of the cornerbacks also on this list. But there's a few other Bears who I think are in this conversation to where if you're putting them head to head with some of the guys that made the list over them, I'm open to discussions on why those other players might be better. But I do think you can make a pretty good case for a few other guys in this Bears roster that belong in that top 100, if not right just on the fringe there. Let's start with Joe Thuney. He comes in on our list at number 54 in the top 100. One spot right behind Minnesota Vikings offensive tackle Christian Darrisaw, and 2 spots behind Atlanta Falcons guard Chris Lindstrom. He's actually also 2 spots ahead of Indianapolis Colts guard Quentin Nelson at 56. And to me, this is right about the range that I think someone like Joe Thuney should be in, where it's like, I don't think anybody's going to say Joe Thuney's a top 25 player in the NFL, right? If we're talking top 25 players include Tyreek Hill, Fred Warner, George Kittle, etc. Like, Joe Thuney's a really good player and a really good guard. Maybe a couple of years ago, he was a top 25, top 30 player in the league. But at age 32, going into his age 33 season, let me double check. He turns 33 in November, so like mid-season, right? That's enough to put him in the 50s for me. I'm generally okay with that. I mean, personally, I think I would take Joe Thuney over the likes of like Chris Lindstrom, who I just mentioned at number 52. Thuney's at 54, so am I going to blow up about moving them up 2 spots? It's not really that big of a deal. Whereas, the next offensive lineman above them is Trent Williams for the 49ers at number 41. Like, is Thuney better than Trent Williams? Trent Williams is really old now too, but he's still playing at a really high level, so but probably not better than Trent Williams. I think Laramie Tunsil's a little high on our list at 36, but Tristan Wirfs is up there, and Jordan Mailata from the Eagles are up there a little bit higher. I would move Joe Thuney just a little bit, but not a lot. I can live with Joe Thuney at number 54 on this list. What I have a lot more trouble with is Jalen Johnson missing the top 100 altogether. He was in my ballot in the top 100, but there are how many cornerbacks? There are 11 cornerbacks in this top 100, meaning that Jalen Johnson would be at best the 12th best cornerback in the NFL. And I'm not necessarily here to power rank cornerbacks and say, well, actually he is number 6 or whatever it might be. But if we let me go through the list of cornerbacks who made the top 100 here, and you can decide for yourself where you'd put him. And I can kind of tell. I'll show you what range I think he's at. But starting from the bottom, number 95 was Tariq Woolen from the Seattle Seahawks. Then you move up a little bit to Denzel Ward of the Cleveland Browns at number 84. Christian Benford of the Buffalo Bills at number 81. J.C. Horn of the Panthers at number 75. And then we got Travis Hunter is half wide receiver, half cornerback. Gets in at number 67, despite having never played a snap in the NFL. Patriots cornerback Christian Gonzalez at 65. And I think so far, every player I've mentioned, I would take Jalen Johnson over. Devin Witherspoon of the Seahawks at number 59 is in there. Trent McDuffie of the Chiefs at number 51. Travarius Ward of the Colts at number 50. Let's see, who else? A couple more still in this list. I just have to get back up a little bit higher because now we're getting to the top 30. Is Sauce Gardner of the Jets and who else is in here? Sorry, I'm losing my cornerbacks here quickly. There's a couple other cornerbacks at the top here though, but Patrick Surtain from the Broncos, he's the other one missing. Those last few guys, I'm good with being ahead of Jalen Johnson. If you want to make the argument that Sauce Gardner Derek Stingley is one I skipped over, and there's Gardner and Stingley and some of these top, and Patrick Surtain. Those three for sure are better than Jalen Johnson. From there, we get into coin toss range when we talk about, Travarius Ward from the Indianapolis Colts. He's a good player, but I think head-to-head with Jalen Johnson, like that one I could pretty easily make a case for Jalen Johnson. And Trent McDuffie from the Chiefs, that one's a little bit tougher. Like I would put McDuffie over Ward and McDuffie a little bit higher on this list. I think he's a really good player. I think Jalen Johnson's a really good player too. But I think Johnson's better than the likes of Devin Witherspoon from the Seahawks or Christian Gonzalez from the Patriots. So certainly Travis Hunter as a rookie, I don't think deserves to be this high. J.C. Horn from the Panthers. Like these are quality young players who are good cornerbacks. But like we've seen Jalen Johnson be a lockdown, shutdown player for multiple seasons. We've seen him have the turnovers and the playmaking that maybe he didn't have as much early in his career. He's making the Pro Bowls. Like he's making tackles for losses in the running game. Last season, he got more involved from a physical standpoint that way. Like maybe he doesn't have the extremes of some of the turnover numbers other guys have, but some of that is a reflection of how little he gets thrown at. I think we've seen teams, especially in the Bears defense, target the other outside cornerback, whether it's been Tyreek Stevenson or Terrell Smith. Like Jalen Johnson suffers a little bit by not having as good of an opposite corner opposite him because teams just heavily targeted Tyreek Stevenson the last 2 years. He's one of the most targeted cornerbacks in football when he's been on the field. And so there's even fewer opportunities for Jalen Johnson to get his hand on footballs. And he has still been able to get his hand on football. 6 interceptions in the last 2 years with that pick six, 18 pass breakups, a couple of forced fumbles. He's been an elite NFL cornerback. And that absolutely belongs in the top 100 of this list. Again, I can't put a number on it. I mean, is he in the top 75? Is he in the top 50? I mean, Trent McDuffie's at 51. And that's kind of like, to me, like that's right where the Jalen Johnson line is. Like Travarius Ward at 50, Trent McDuffie at 51. Like that's where Jalen Johnson belongs there. I still think having Travarius Ward, that high is too high for me, but like I'm fine with Jalen Johnson right in that Joe Tooney range. Like they're both really, really good players. There's a few guys at their position that are better than them for sure, but they're just really solid, reliable players that are top 100 players in the NFL for sure. That's the biggest snub from the Bears. I think given Montez Sweat's struggles last season, I'm not surprised he's not in the top 100, but I think if he gets back to double-digit sacks again this season, he's a player who will jump into the top 100. And I think the perception around DJ Moore has dropped a bit as he's been in a struggling Bears offense the last couple of seasons, despite having a career-high 1,364 yards in 2023. Like, he's had a couple of pretty good seasons, especially his first year with Chicago. Like, I think the perception of him among top receivers has dropped a little bit. So I'm not going to say I'm surprised that he's not in the list because there's so many good wide receivers. But, like, I don't know, Drake London from the Falcons and Chris Olave from the Saints are in the top 100 here. Devontae Adams is still in the top 100 with the Rams. I just don't know that those guys are like clearly head and shoulders way better than DJ Moore. Like you could make the head-to-head individual case on any of them, and I'm not here to with pitchforks on the DJ Moore side of things here. But I look at it and say, man, I think Moore's getting a little bit underrated in some of those conversations as well. Maybe even TJ Edwards at linebacker, but some other good linebackers were snubbed from this list as well. Roquan barely made it at number 89 in there. So there's a lot of good players at these positions, and we can sit here and argue that every Bears player should be really, really good. And I know that we all know that's not the case. Kyler Gordon probably is never going to be in one of these top 100s because he's a slot cornerback, but like I think he's on the borderline of this conversation too, given how good he's been in the run as a blitzer and in coverage. He's such a well-rounded player and a big playmaker in this defense. So the Bears have some guys here. They have some guys right on the cusp of being among the better players in football, and a big season under Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen could really push them over the top when we do next year's top 100 players in the NFL on the Locked On Podcast Network. You can hear the full top 100 breakdown over at the Locked On Sports Today podcast here on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Go make Locked On Sports Today your second listen of the day. Thank you for making Locked On Bears your first listen today, and hopefully every single day. We're ramping back up to a full 5 days a week as the Bears start reporting to training camp. There's finally more Bears stuff to talk about. Daily content coming back your way, so make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Coming back on Monday, Make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for another opportunity to bear down.